and welcome to a brief demonstration of Integrify's contract management contract approval workflow. What we have here is an initial dashboard where a user can launch the request from. Got a little bit of information about company headquarters and 12 links to different dashboards that we're going to use. So let's go ahead and click on the contract review link. We are moving through this workflow in what we call developer mode. That is to say that all the screens and all the emails are being echoed back to the original screen of the person who requested it. So what I'm moving through here is the first form of the request. Some of the fields are required, others are not. Some are free text and some are drop-down lists. So I'm going to go ahead and start filling out the fields. And I will explain them as I go. So this one's free text. Here we have an optional field on this form that allows me to pick someone else to approve. This is an optional path that we don't necessarily have to execute. Once we fill this form out, I'll show you the overall path of the workflow. So here we've got a calendar field we can pick. We can choose what the contract amount is going to be. It will format that as a dollar amount. Here we have an example of a drop-down list where we can do different selections from pre-created types. Here's another one, new vendor. This is approved by the legal department. Here we have a file attachment field where we can grab sample documents and bring them in to the request. Here we're capturing the other client's email so that we can then send them an email when this request is approved or denied. We have that ability within the framework of the request. So I've got this first form filled out. If this was a particularly complicated form or if the information is hard to get, I can actually save this form in draft mode and return to it with the answers that I don't have in a later session. But since I have filled everything out, I'm going to go ahead and submit this, and we'll immediately move on to the next task in the system. So here, now the name of the request has updated itself with the serial number of the request and also a customized name of the request using the name of the counterparty in this contract. And what we have here is our first approval task within this workflow. So an approval task is basically a simple screen that lets a user do a decision about how this request should move forward. So in this case, we have 4 choices, and these choices are completely up to you. The assortment of choices and the names of them are completely at the discretion of the designer. So we've got approved, denied, and then 2 versions of basically send this back for rework. So if we were to send it back for rework, and we might decide to do that based on what we see on the original form. So we've given the user of the approval task a link that leads back to the original form so they can review this all in basically a read-only screen. So let's say that maybe I disagree with the fact that this is coming from the operations department. I'm going to change it. I'm going to put a note in here. Change department listed. So I'm going to send it back for rework, submit it. So what this does is it puts a task back in the original submitter's queue with the original data. That's part of our pre-fills feature. And I'm going to go ahead and change the department. Maybe we'll make it sales. We'll put some additional detail in here. We'll go ahead and submit this. Back to the legal review. If I look at the editing request, because we've actually moved this to a slightly different field just because of the structure, here's all the data that we filled out. And in fact, another option that we have with an Integrify task like this, another option we have with an approval task like this one, is the ability to configure the emails that we send to the approvers in a very flexible and rich way. For example, we can have customized email subject lines. We can also customize on a task-by-task basis the data that we send to the approver so that they can get a clear idea of what it is they're approving, including, in fact, via email. We can also send a link or the actual file attachment via email to the person so that they can download it and review it if it's important for them. As part of the choices that they've got on the main email task, we also have them echoed in 4 unique links that correspond to each of the choices that the user can execute within this approval task. So by following the link from a mobile device, we can actually approve and action this workflow request and move it forward just by using a mobile client and following these links. This link will also cause a browser window to open that will allow the user to complete a comment in a browser window that is specific to this approval task, and then there'll be a final confirmation message letting the user know that the task is complete and that the workflow request is moving forward. So it's basically the same interface, all the same features that are here. And in fact, this entire interface is designed in what's called a responsive manner, which means that even if I'm accessing Integrify from a device with a smaller display screen than your standard laptop or desktop monitor, I'm not going to lose any of the information on this screen. I'm not going to lose any of the functionality. These screens will merely reformat themselves to adjust to the display screen that the user happens to be using. So as long as you've got a live internet connection, you can connect to this. So I'm going to go ahead and add comments to the effect that I'm ready for this to move forward. I'll submit it. Now let me actually show you the overall workflow, which maybe I should have done a little sooner. So here we have a graphical map of the workflow request that we're working through. This is a static read-only view of the workflow, but it does give us a lot of information about how far this workflow has proceeded and who's worked on it. So each of the items that are highlighted here in a solid color are tasks that we've completed so far. The items that are highlighted with the thin red border are currently active tasks which 2 independent people in this case can work on. We can do parallel processing in a workflow like this. So we've got departmental approval and the secondary approver, both of which are pending. Once they're done, we'll then move on to finance approval. The gray squares in this workflow represent tasks that we either haven't reached because we haven't gotten that far in the workflow yet, or they're paths that we didn't follow, such as the quick edit request or the request denied path in this case. So we haven't gone that way. What I can do now is transition back to my task screen here, completed, go ahead and approve it. Here we have an example of the audit trail. For every request in Integrify, there's a page like this. It's a permanent audit trail, so as long as you're a subscriber to Integrify, you have access to this data. You can also migrate it and take it with you. Should you choose to move on to another system, you have access to all this. Here we have a high-level summary of the request beginning at the top of the screen. So information, the customized name of the request, the serial number of the request, the workflow that we're in, the current status that we're at. So what milestone did we recently pass? So we're pending departmental approval. Who generated this request? When the request was submitted, when it was last updated. Here we have a link to the task, since the Sam Cook account that I'm logged into here is in fact the secondary approver right now. So we have a secondary approval, and the reason I may have mentioned before that we're able to see all these screens from my account is that we're actually moving through this workflow in a special debug manner, which lets you demonstrate the workflow to yourself, debug it, show it to others before you actually put it into production mode and generate requests that people need to respond to. So here we've got the secondary approver. We're going to go ahead and approve that. And now, if we look at the flow view, we can see that we've moved ahead. We moved on from these other 2 tasks, and we're now at the active task. So we can actually see by highlighting interactive tasks, we can actually see who in particular is working on a task, how long it's been in their queue, what the status of the current task, whether they've opened it to look at, here it's in progress, or whether it's just been added to their queue and they haven't yet logged into Integrify to respond to it. And all the information on the request detail page that we visited a minute ago is available to us in the reporting engine. Integrify has an integrated reporting engine that can help us create statistical and analytical reports so that we can go back and, or if an audit is asked for, or if we need to compile statistics on how many of these requests we've done, how often they've been done, we can go through and see every step of the way. So here is actually a task-by-task record of the data that was captured about this particular request. So here's the original request in the original form. Here is the approval decision that was first done, send for rework, please change the department. We scroll down a bit further. We can see that, in fact, the information was changed. The department was changed to sales from operations, and we also added more details on the more details field, I believe we did. Yes, there it is, in the more details field. So again, part of the permanent, and then we travel back to the secondary approval by legal. Okay, this time they approved it, so we move forward, and that's reflected here in the approval. So finance is approved. We've also notified the client that this is actually approved. So we're actually pretty far down through this workflow. We've actually moved pretty far. And in fact, we've actually completed this workflow because we generated this request for a very small dollar amount, in this case, less than $10,000. We've actually moved all the way through the process. We didn't actually need to seek an additional level of approval from the Chief Operating Officer. So this request is essentially complete.